They say you don't go wandering the mountains after dark, not up in the hollers where the fog sits low and the trees grow thick enough to keep out the stars. Not because of bears or wildcats or the way the wind sometimes sounds like a woman crying. They say it because of things older than time and quieter than death, things that don't have names, things you can only feel when the air suddenly turns colder than it should be, even in the middle of July. I didn't believe any of that when I first arrived. I was a researcher, or at least that's what I told myself. I was working on a graduate thesis about isolated Appalachian communities, their oral traditions, their unique dialects. I wanted to record the dying voices of the mountain folk before they vanished into memory. So I rented a cabin in a tiny town that didn't show up on most maps, halfway up an unpaved road that curved like a question mark into the blue haze of the mountains. The locals didn't like me much. They didn't hate me either, but they were wary. I was an outsider, a stranger with a notebook and a recorder. They answered my questions politely, but never fully, like they were measuring every word against some invisible scale. I heard them, whispering behind me sometimes at the general store, asking why I'd rented that cabin. That cabin. I didn't ask at first. I figured it was just the usual small-town superstition. But after a week, I noticed things, subtle things. The door would be open in the morning, even though I always locked it. I started hearing knocks on the window at night. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic knocks, the kind a person makes when they know you're awake, and the trees. They move differently. There, when the wind blew through the valley, it was like the forest was breathing. Some nights, I swear, I heard voices carried in the breeze, not whispers, not quite. More like murmurs of old conversations, fragments of words I couldn't understand, said in tones that made the skin between my shoulders tighten. One day, I met an old man named Eli, sitting on the porch of a derelict church near the edge of town. He had that deeply lined face you only see in people who've spent their whole lives outside. He didn't say much at first, but when I asked about the cabin, he looked me right in the eye and said something I'll never forget. "You're sleeping in the wrong mouth of the mountain, boy." I asked what he meant. He spat into the dirt and said, "Some places you don't live, you just survive." I pressed him for more, but he only shook his head. "There's things older than people in them woods. Smarter, too. Tricksters, mimics, feed off you slow, like a tick under the skin. You think you're safe because you're inside, but that cabin ain't never been part of the inside." That night, I dreamed of hands scratching on the outside walls. Not banging, scratching. Slow, curious, like something trying to figure out what the wood was made of. When I woke up, there were grooves on the walls. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an animal, maybe a raccoon. But the marks were too high, too deliberate. They formed shapes, not letters, shapes. Like someone trying to copy writing without knowing what it meant. Then came the footsteps. They started around 3 a.m., always 3 a.m. I'd hear them on the porch first, soft and cautious. Then around the cabin, circling, one set, then two, then more. Some barefoot, some with heavy boots. One night, they stopped right outside my bedroom window. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as a shadow passed. Across the moonlight. I never heard them leave. By the end of the second week, I stopped sleeping. I kept every light on. But the mountain didn't care. Lights flickered, batteries drained, my phone, my recorder, my laptop. They all failed slowly, one by one, like something was drawing them down. Then came the mimicry. It started with birdsong, but it wasn't right. I know what birds sound like. I've studied their calls. This wasn't that. It was almost right. Almost. Like a recording being played back by someone who didn't understand tone. One morning, I heard my own voice calling. My name from the woods. It sounded just like me, but I was inside. The next day, I hiked down to town and demanded answers. I was shaking, exhausted, half delirious. I found Eli again. He looked at me like he already knew. "You've been listening when you should have been leaving," he said. I begged him to tell me what was happening. "You stay up in them woods long enough. They start wanting you. Not all at once, piece by piece. You leave now, you might come back whole. But stay past the third moon, and you're theirs. He wouldn't say more. That night I packed, but my car wouldn't start. I tried hiking down, but the woods had changed. Trails I marked were gone. Landmarks were different. The air was wrong, too thick, too still. I walked for hours and ended up back at the cabin. That was when I started seeing them. Not clearly, just shapes between the trees. Tall, thin figures with impossibly long arms. Faces too smooth, eyes that reflected no light. They watched. They didn't move. But when I blinked, they were closer. I boarded the windows, pushed furniture against the door. I stayed inside for 2 days, not eating, barely drinking. And then they came, not through the door, not through the windows. They came through the walls. The wood began to bend, like something was pressing through from the other side. Faces emerged in the grain, dozens of them, screaming silently. The boards didn't break. They stretched, and then they opened. I don't remember what happened next. I woke in the woods, covered in dirt and ash. The cabin was gone, not burned, not destroyed, just gone, like it had never been there. The clearing was empty. I stumbled down the mountain half insane. Eli was gone. The church was boarded up. The town was deserted. No one remembered me. No one remembered the cabin. No one even remembered the name of the hollow I'd been living in. But I remember. I still hear the knocks sometimes, even though I live states away. Always at 3 a.m. Slow. Deliberate. I never open the door, and sometimes when I pass by a mirror at night, I see the forest behind me, waiting. The Appalachian Mountains have stood for centuries, their ancient peaks whispering secrets to those who dare to listen. The dense forests, winding trails, and forgotten hollows hold more than just the echoes of wildlife. They cradle something, far older, far darker. This is a story passed down in hushed tones, a tale of something that lurks in the shadowed valleys, something that watches, waits, and remembers. It begins with a man named Elias Whitaker, a folklorist who dedicated his life to documenting the eerie legends of the region. He had spent years collecting stories, tales of the moon-eyed people, the Bell Witch, and the phantom hitchhikers that wandered the misty back roads. But it was his final expedition into the deepest parts of the mountains that sealed his fate. Elias had heard rumors of a place called Black Hollow, a secluded valley where the trees grew twisted and the air hung thick, even on the clearest of days. Locals avoided it, speaking of strange lights flickering between the trunks at night, of voices calling out in no language any living person could recognize. Some claimed it was cursed land, that the ground itself was sick, poisoned by something, buried deep beneath the roots. Undeterred, Elias packed his equipment, a tape recorder, a camera, and a journal, and set out on foot. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. No birds sang, no insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to die, as if afraid to disturb the silence. His compass spun lazily in his hand, useless. The trees loomed taller here, their bark blackened in patches as though scorched by an unseen fire. By nightfall, Elias made camp near a rocky outcrop. He built a small fire, its weak light barely pushing back the pressing dark. That was when he first heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat echoing from the earth itself. He told himself it was his imagination, the exhaustion playing, tricks on his mind. But then the whispers started. At first they were faint, just beyond the edge of hearing, murmurs that might have been the rustling of leaves, but soon they grew clearer. Voices, dozens of them overlapping in a language that twisted in his ears, syllables clicking and hissing in ways no human throat could produce. Elias gripped his recorder, hands shaking as he pressed record. The voices stopped the moment the IQ red light flickered on. Then from the trees something moved. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was tall, too tall, its limbs stretching in unnatural angles as it stepped into the firelight. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was pale, stretched too tight over jagged bones, its mouth a lipless slit that curled into something like a smile. Its eyes were black, glossy, reflecting the flames yet absorbing the light, as though they were voids cut into the world itself. Elias couldn't move, couldn't scream. The thing tilted its head, studying him before it spoke, not in those alien whispers, but in his own voice, in words he had spoken years ago, words he had long forgotten. It was repeating them back to him perfectly, as though it had been listening his entire life. Then it stepped closer. The fire died. The tape recorder, when found weeks later by a search party, contained only 3 minutes of Elias's ragged breathing before cutting off into silence. His journal was recovered nearby, the last entry scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting. It remembers everything. It remembers us all. No trace of Elias was ever found, but sometimes on still nights in black. Hollow, if you listen closely, you can hear something moving between the trees. And if you're very, very unlucky, it might just start speaking in your voice, too. The Appalachian Mountains have always been a place of mystery, their rolling peaks and shadowed valleys holding secrets older than memory. The locals speak in hushed tones about the things that wander the mist-laden hollows, the things that watch from the trees, the things that remember. This is not just a story. It is a warning about what happens when you listen too closely to the whispers in the dark. Elias Whitaker was a man who had spent his life chasing ghosts. A folklorist by trade, he had dedicated decades to documenting the strange and unsettling tales of the Appalachians. He had interviewed old-timers who spoke of the moon-eyed people, pale beings who could only see by moonlight. He had collected accounts of the Bell Witch, a vengeful spirit that tormented a family until they fled their home. He had even tracked down the legend of the Flatwoods Monster, a towering, faceless entity that emerged from the woods in a cloud of sulphurous mist. But none of those stories prepared him for what he found in Black Hollow. Black Hollow was not marked on any map. It was a place you only found if it wanted you to. The few who knew of its existence spoke of it in fragments, as if afraid that saying too much would draw its attention. They said the trees there grew crooked, their branches tangled like grasping fingers. They said the ground was soft, too soft, as if something beneath it shifted when no one was looking. And they said that if you stayed past sundown, you would hear the voices that were not human. Elias first heard of Black Hollow from an old woman named Cora Mayfield, a recluse who lived at the edge of Boone County. Her cabin was cluttered, with jars of preserved roots and animal bones, the walls lined with strange symbols scratched into the wood. She had agreed to speak with him only after he brought her a bottle of rye whiskey, and even then, her words were measured, cautious. "You don't go looking for Black Hollow," she had said, her milky eyes fixed on the fire. "It looks for you when—" Elias pressed her. She told him of her grandfather, who had vanished in those woods in 1893. Search parties had found his coat draped over a tree branch, the sleeves turned inside out, the pockets filled with wet leaves. His boots stood neatly beside it as if he had simply stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. The strangest part, the boots were filled with teeth, human teeth. Elias should have heeded her warning, but he was a man who believed in answers, in logic, in the idea that every myth had a root in some forgotten truth. So he packed his gear, a tape recorder, a camera with film he hoped would capture what his eyes could not, and a journal bound in leather, and set out at dawn. The journey into the mountains was uneventful at first. The air was crisp, the sky clear. But as he ventured deeper, the forest changed. The trees grew denser, their trunks blackened in patches as if touched by some unseen rot. The birdsong faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place, leaving the air stagnant and thick. By midday, Elias realized his compass was no longer working. The needle spun lazily, as if confused. He pulled out his map, but the landmarks no longer matched. The ridges were too steep, the streams flowing in the wrong direction. It was as if the land itself had rearranged while he wasn't looking. Pressed on, as the sun dipped below the peaks, Elias made camp near a rocky outcrop. He built a small fire, its weak glow barely holding back the encroaching dark. That was when he first noticed the sound, a slow, rhythmic thudding, like a heartbeat coming from beneath the earth. He told himself it was just his own pulse in, his ears, the exhaustion playing tricks on him, but then the whispering started. At first it was just a murmur, so faint he thought it might be the rustling of leaves. But the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Voices, dozens of them overlapping, speaking in a language that made his skin crawl. The syllables were wrong, too many consonants, hissing and clicking in ways no human tongue could replicate. Elias fumbled for his tape recorder, his hands trembling as he pressed record. The moment the red light flickered on, the voices stopped. Silence. Then, from the trees, something moved. It stepped into the firelight slowly, as if savoring the moment. It was tall, too tall, its limbs elongated, its joints bending in ways that made Elias's stomach twist. Its skin was pale, stretched taut over jagged bones, its mouth a lipless gash that curled into something resembling a smile. But its eyes were the worst, black, glossy, reflecting the firelight, yet swallowing it at the same time, like pits dug into the world itself. Elias couldn't move, couldn't scream. The thing tilted its head, studying him before it spoke, not in those alien whispers, but in his own voice. June 14th, 1998, it said, its words crisp, eerily familiar. Interview with Martha Haggerty. Subject claims to have seen a woman in white near the old railroad tracks. Described her as having no face, just smooth skin were her features. Should be. Elias's blood turned to ice. Those were his words, from his journal, from an entry he had written years ago. The thing took a step closer, its elongated fingers twitching. You remember, it said still in his voice. You remember all of them, the stories, the names, the faces. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps. How did it know? How could it? Then it smiled wider, its teeth too many, too sharp. We remember too. The fire went out. The last thing Elias saw was the thing leaning over him, its breath cold against his face, whispering names. Names of people he had interviewed, people long dead, people whose stories he had written down and tucked away in his archives. Then darkness. The search party found his campsite 2 weeks later. His tent was still standing, his sleeping bag neatly rolled. His tape recorder lay in the ashes of the dead fire, its tape still inside. When they played it back, there was nothing but 3 minutes of Elias's panicked breathing before it cut to silence. His journal was found nearby, open to a fresh page. The writing was shaky, frantic, as if scribbled in a hurry. It remembers everything, every story, every name, every face. It started with a rumor, the kind passed between truck stops and trading posts, whispered over lukewarm coffee by men with too many miles behind their eyes. There was a place high in the Appalachian backcountry that had never been settled, never been mapped properly, and for good reason. They said the ground there was older than sin, that it groaned beneath your feet like something sleeping light and dreaming dark. I was a journalist then, the kind who liked to think he chased stories that mattered. But really, I chased ghosts of people, of places, of legends, just believable enough to twist your stomach. The story of Quiet Hollow sounded like one of those. It was barely a whisper, a crease in the records, a smear of ink in county archives. No birth records, no land deeds, just a name on a yellowing topographical map with the words "Survey Incomplete" beside it. I packed light. A tent, a recorder, a notepad, and just enough skepticism to keep me sane. The trail into Quiet Hollow wasn't marked, but the locals pointed me in the general direction with more hesitancy than usual. An old man at the gas station warned me not to go past the ridge at dusk. When I asked why, he just shook his head. "Sometimes the trees move," he said. "Sometimes the fog don't burn off until it's already too late." The first 2 days were uneventful. The trail was overgrown, but passable. Wildlife was scarce. I saw no deer, heard no birds, just the wind combing through pine needles like fingers across a harp. It wasn't until I descended into the hollow itself that things began to change. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, oppressive quiet that presses on your eardrums like altitude sickness. My own breath sounded wrong. The second sign was the trees. They were old, impossibly so, twisted black bark, leaves like rusted metal. I swear they leaned when I wasn't looking, only to stand still the moment I turned. I set up camp near the remains of what looked like a homestead, a crumbling stone foundation, and the suggestion of a chimney. I found artifacts nearby, a rusted kettle, a child's doll made of corn husks, and buried in the dirt, a photograph sealed in wax. The image was faded, but it showed a family of 6 standing in front of a cabin, eyes scratched out. The wax wasn't to preserve it, it was to keep it hidden. That night I heard footsteps. They came softly at first, just beyond the circle of my fire. Too rhythmic to be an animal, too cautious to be human. I stayed still, holding my breath as they circled, then stopped. Minutes passed. Then laughter, high, wet, and slow, like something trying to remember how to sound human. I didn't sleep. The fire burned low, but I dared not gather wood. At some point near dawn, I heard something whisper my name from just outside the tent. Not a question, a statement. The next day, I found carvings on the trees, circles inside circles, eyes with too many pupils. I followed a game trail deeper into the hollow and found more remnants. A well lined with teeth instead of stone, a barn whose roof had collapsed inward like something had fallen through from above, and a series of dolls strung together with human hair. My compass spun in place. My GPS stopped working. The sun hung too long in the sky, and then dropped all at once. I began to doubt myself, my memory, my senses. I wrote in my journal to anchor myself, but my handwriting changed, slanted backward, letters forming symbols. I didn't know I knew. That night, the fog came. It poured into the hollow like a tide, thick and metallic smelling. I couldn't see past my nose. I heard voices calling out from the mist, each one someone I had lost in my life. My mother, my childhood friend, a lover from college. They wept, pleaded, begged for me to find them. I stayed in the tent until the fabric began to move. Hands pressed from the outside. Not one, many. Fingers too long, too thin. They stroked the nylon like they were petting a cage. I screamed. They laughed. At some point, I must have passed out. When I awoke, everything was gone. The tent, my gear, my journal. I was lying on bare earth. The photograph melted beside me. Only the stone foundation remained. My clothes were damp and smelled of sulfur. My watch was cracked, stopped at 3:12. I walked. For hours, maybe days. The forest looped in on itself. Landmarks repeated. I began to hear the humming. Low and constant, like chanting from under the soil. I covered my ears. It echoed inside my skull. Eventually, I found the trail, or rather, it found me. I walked out with nothing but the clothes on my back and dirt under my nails. I hitchhiked to the nearest town and checked myself into a motel. That night, I found my recorder on the nightstand. I had lost it on the first day. It played by itself. The audio was warped, but clear enough. My voice, narrating the hike, then screams, then silence, then the humming. And under that, voices whispering in unison, one more for the hollow, one more for the earth. I never went back, but sometimes when the air is still and the shadows stretch too long, I hear the hum. and I know it remembers me. The mountain never forgets. It waits, patient beneath root and stone, calling softly to those who listen. And if you listen long enough, you will go back. We all do. The first time I heard about Grayson Hollow, it was from an old ranger named Darrell, who worked out of a field station near the Virginia-Kentucky border. We'd been sitting around the stove sipping weak coffee when he said, almost too casually, "There's places in these hills where the land forgets you ever came." At the time, I thought he was just telling stories. I was writing a piece for a backcountry journal, something about lost towns, forgotten trails, the rural fade of old Americana. Grayson Hollow wasn't on any map, and the ranger couldn't tell me how to get there, only how not to. "Don't take the fork past Old Man Brewer's mine," he said, "and don't follow the creek if it starts running backwards." The way he said it made me laugh at the time, not anymore. 3 weeks later, I found myself driving through McDowell County in West Virginia, following leads on forgotten communities that once thrived deep in the hills before the cold dried up, and the roads fell away. I wasn't looking for Grayson Hollow, not really, but the place has a way of finding you when it wants to. The road I was on had long since turned from gravel to dirt, and from dirt to a gnarled trail swallowed by branches and fog. My GPS blinked out 15 miles back, and my phone was useless. I should have turned around, but I saw something just past the tree line, a set of wooden stairs, half buried in moss, leading nowhere. That's when I felt it. A shift, not in the air, not in the ground, in me. I left the car behind and started walking. The forest was quiet in the way that makes you listen harder. No birds, no bugs, just the occasional creak of branches overhead. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the woods were folding in around me. The light changed too, muted, dim, even though the sun was still up. I checked my watch. It had stopped. I came across the town, or what was left of it, an hour later. A single road curved gently downhill, lined with the remnants of buildings, a rusted gas pump beside a collapsed general store, a church with its steeple snapped in half, houses gutted by rot, and years of silence. At the end of the lane stood a farmhouse, paint peeled away, windows black. It wasn't empty. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Against every instinct, I knocked. The woman who opened the door was older than time itself. White hair braided tight against her skull, a dress worn so thin you could see the shape of her bones beneath it. Her eyes were gray, not cloudy, just colorless, like smoke. She looked at me like I was expected, not welcomed. Expected. "You're a few winters early," she said, then stepped aside. Inside smelled like pine needles and old paper. The walls were covered in charcoal drawings, mountains, trees, people. Their faces were missing, just blank ovals where eyes and mouths should be. "You saw the stairs?" she asked, settling into a rocking chair. I nodded. She lit a long, thin candle. The flame didn't flicker, even when the wind whistled through the cracks in the window. "You're in it now," she said. "It don't let you leave easy." I stayed the night. I didn't sleep. Every hour I heard knocking on the walls, the sound of something circling the house outside. The woman, she never gave her name, sat up in that rocking chair watching the door like she was waiting for someone to open it from the other side. At dawn, she told me to leave. No explanation, no farewell. Just pointed to the door and said, "Before it wakes up." The woods were different on the way out. Quieter somehow. The trees leaned inward. I didn't see my car until sundown, and when I did, it was covered in mud, pine needles piled up on the hood like it had been there for months. The engine started, but the radio played only static, and my watch still hadn't moved. I drove until I found a ranger station. Not Darrell's, a different one. The man behind the desk didn't know any Darrell, hadn't heard of him. When I asked about Grayson Hollow, he gave me a long look and said, "Ain't no such place." Back in town, I tried to look it up. Nothing, no photos, no records, just a couple of hushed forums talking about strange disappearances in the Appalachians, odd symbols found carved into tree bark. whispers about a town that moves through the hills like a ghost. They all called it something different: Ash Hollow, Gray Place, Whisper Ridge. But the signs were always the same: stairs to nowhere. Black-eyed. Figures watching from between trees, smoke without fire. Months passed. I moved on to other stories, other places. But I started seeing those drawings, not copies, the same ones. On alley walls in cities, on the back of old menus, blank faces staring back at me. Sometimes I hear the knocking again, late at night, not from outside, from inside the walls. Tried to forget, but forgetting isn't something Grayson Hollow allows. I dream about that old woman sometimes. In the dream, she opens the door, and I see what's behind her. A staircase spiraling down into the earth. The walls pulse like a heartbeat. And below, waiting in the dark, something shifts. It's not a place you visit. It's a place that waits. For people like me. For anyone who notices a set of wooden stairs in the woods. For those who walk forward when they should have turned back. They say the mountains are old, that they hold secrets. But some secrets don't want to stay buried, and some towns don't want to be found. They want to follow. If you ever find yourself alone in the Appalachians and you see stairs that shouldn't be there, do yourself a kindness. Don't go up, and whatever you hear in the trees, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love, don't answer. Because once you've heard, it's already heard you. I first heard about the Van Leer Path from a man I met in a diner outside Hazard, Kentucky. He was hunched over his coffee, hands trembling, eyes sunk deep into shadows that spoke of years without rest. I asked him if he knew any trails that hadn't made it to the hiking guides. He looked up slowly, as if waking from a dream he had never quite escaped, and said, "There's one, but you don't want it." He told me it ran along the eastern ridge of Black Hollow Mountain, a place forgotten by maps and memory. Once a thriving mining settlement, it had been swallowed whole by the wilderness after a series of disappearances in the early 1950s. The forest had taken back the roads, the mines, the cabins, but the path remained, hidden but patient, like something that knew it would be found again. I was researching local legends for a documentary series that never got off the ground. I had heard whispers of children born with empty eyes, of voices heard under the hills, of shadows that moved upstream against the current. I thought it was folklore. I thought it would make a good story. I rented a cabin at the edge of the county, line far enough into the woods that the cell service bled out. It was old but sturdy, with iron nails in the beams and the smell of ash still clinging to the hearth. The locals who rented it to me didn't say much, only asked if I had brought a bell. I asked what for. The old woman handed me a brass one on a leather string and said, "Ring it if the forest goes quiet. That means it's listening." On the second day, I found what remained of the Van Leer Path. It began at the back of a thicket choked with bramble, but the stones of an old road were still visible if you looked close. They were laid in a winding pattern that made no sense, zigzagging where straight lines would do. I walked slowly, marking the trees with orange tape, though something told me it wouldn't help. The forest was unnaturally still. The trees stood too close together, gnarled like fists, their bark dark with age or something older. Every so often I'd catch movement in the corner of my eye, but all was gone when I turned. Not squirrels, not birds, something taller. Watching, I hiked for hours, found a rusted lantern hanging from a tree branch 20 feet up. No ladder, no platform, just dangling, swinging slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. Deeper in, the path passed through the remains of a stone archway, weather-worn, covered in runes that looked scratched, not carved. I didn't recognize the language. Beyond the arch, the air changed. It became thicker, slower, like walking underwater. Sound dulled. Even the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves seemed far away. I rang the bell. The sound didn't echo. It just stopped. I should have turned back, but something pulled me forward. A low hum, barely perceptible. It came from beneath the earth. a vibration in my bones more than my ears. I followed it. At the center of a clearing, I found the remains of the Van Leer camp. Cabins collapsed inward, like lungs deflating. Mining, carts frozen on rusted tracks, a church without a roof, and in the middle, a well, ringed with black stones so cold they steamed. I looked down. No bottom, just darkness that swallowed the light. Then I heard the breathing. Not mine, not human. It came from the trees all around me, labored, wet, as if the forest itself were alive and exhaling. The trees shifted subtly, and I saw that they were growing closer together, branches stretching, reaching. I ran. The trail was gone, the tape I had placed torn or missing. I rang the bell again, and again the sound simply ended. My flashlight dimmed, then died, though I had changed the batteries that morning. The hum returned, louder now, pulsing, syncing with my heartbeat. I stumbled into a hollow filled with standing stones, each carved with crude faces, mouths open, eyes hollow, screaming. No two were alike. In the center stood a larger one, 10 feet tall, cloaked in moss and fungus, its face worn smooth. I could feel it looking at me. I don't know how long I stood there. Time slipped. The sun hung in one place for hours, or maybe it was minutes. I saw things. People moving between the trees, walking backwards. A girl in a white dress hovering inches above the ground. Her face was mine, but her eyes were empty. When I finally made it back to the cabin, it was night, or close enough. The stars were wrong. Different constellations, or none at all. I rang the bell one last time. It shattered in my hand. The next morning I packed and left without looking back. The forest watched me go. I could feel it. I tried to forget. I threw away the footage, deleted the audio files, burned the notebook. But the humming followed. Sometimes in the pipes, sometimes in the floorboards. When it starts, I see the girl again, just beyond the doorway. Eyes like polished bone. I moved across the country. Still, the stones appear. One day on my porch. Another beside my bed, always cold, always steaming. There are places in the Appalachians where the old things still live, things that were here before us, that remember, that wait. If you find the Van Leer path, turn around. Do not follow the humming. Do not ring the bell, because if it breaks, it means it has found you, and it does not forget. The first time I heard about Grayson Hollow, it was from an old ranger named Darrell, who worked out of a field station near the Virginia-Kentucky border. We'd been sitting around the stove sipping weak coffee when he said, almost too casually, "There's places in these hills where the land forgets you ever came." At the time, I thought he was just telling stories. I was writing a piece for a backcountry journal, something about lost towns, forgotten trails, the rural fate of old Americana. Grayson Hollow wasn't on any map, and the ranger couldn't tell me how to get there, only how not to. "Don't take the fork past Old Man Brewer's mine," he said, "and don't follow the creek if it starts running backwards." The way he said it made me laugh at the time, not anymore. 3 weeks later, I found myself driving through McDowell County in West Virginia, following leads on forgotten communities that once thrived deep in the hills before the coal dried up. And the roads fell away. I wasn't looking for Grayson Hollow, not really, but the place has a way of finding you when it wants to. The road I was on had long since turned from gravel to dirt, and from dirt to a gnarled trail swallowed by branches and fog. My GPS blinked out 15 miles back, and my phone was useless. I should have turned around, but I saw something just past the tree line, a set of wooden stairs half buried in moss, leading nowhere. That's when I felt it. A shift, not in the air, not in the ground, in me. I left the car behind and started walking. The forest was quiet in the way that makes you listen harder. No birds, no bugs, just the occasional creak of branches overhead. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the woods were folding in around me. The light changed too, muted, dim, even though the sun was still up. I checked my watch. It had stopped. I came across the town, or what was left of it. An hour later, a single road curved gently downhill, lined with the remnants of buildings, a rusted gas pump beside a collapsed general store, a church with its steeple snapped in half, houses gutted by rot and years of silence. At the end of the lane stood a farmhouse, paint peeled away, windows black. It wasn't empty. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Against every instinct, I knocked. The woman who opened the door was older than time itself. White hair braided tight against her skull, a dress worn so thin you could see the shape of her bones beneath it. Her eyes were gray, not cloudy, just colorless, like smoke. She looked at me like I was expected, not welcomed. Expected. "You're a few winters early," she said, then stepped aside. Inside smelled like pine needles and old paper. The walls were covered in charcoal drawings, mountains, trees, people. Their faces were missing, just blank ovals where eyes and mouths should be. "You saw the stairs?" she asked, settling into a rocking chair. I nodded. She lit a long, thin candle. The flame didn't flicker, even when the wind whistled through the cracks in the window. "You're in it now," she said. "It don't let you leave easy." I stayed the night. I didn't sleep. Every hour I heard knocking on the walls, the sound of something circling the house outside. The woman, she never gave her name, sat up in that rocking chair watching the door like she was waiting for someone to open it from the other side. At dawn, she told me to leave. No explanation, no farewell, just pointed to the door and said, "Before it wakes up." The woods were different on the way out, quieter somehow. The trees leaned inward. I didn't see my car until sundown, and when I did, it was covered in mud, pine needles piled up on the hood like it had been there for months. The engine started, but the radio played only static, and my watch still hadn't moved. I drove until I found a ranger station, not Daryl's, a different one. The man behind the desk didn't know any Daryl, hadn't heard of him. When I asked about Grayson Hollow, he gave me a long look and said, "Ain't no such place." Back in town, I tried to look it up. Nothing. No photos, no records, just a couple of hushed forums talking about strange disappearances in the Appalachians. Odd symbols found carved into tree bark, whispers about a town that moves through the hills like a ghost. They all called it something different. Ash Hollow, Gray Place, Whisper Ridge. But the signs were always the same. Stairs to nowhere, black-eyed, figures watching from between trees, smoke without fire. Months passed. I moved on to other stories, other places. But I started seeing those drawings. Not copies, the same ones, on alley walls in cities, on the back of old menus. Blank faces staring back at me. Sometimes I hear the knocking again, late at night, not from outside, from inside the walls. Tried to forget, but forgetting isn't something Grayson Hollow allows. I dream about that old woman sometimes. In the dream, she opens the door, and I see what's behind her, a staircase spiraling down into the earth. The walls pulse like a heartbeat, and below, waiting in the dark, something shifts. It's not a place you visit, it's a place that waits. For people like me, for anyone who notices a set of wooden stairs in the woods, for those who walk forward when they should have turned back. They say the mountains are old, that they hold secrets, but some secrets don't want to stay buried, and some towns don't want to be found. They want to follow. If you ever find yourself alone in the Appalachians and you see stairs that shouldn't be there, do yourself a kindness. Don't go up. And whatever you hear in the trees, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love, don't answer. Because once you've heard it, it's already heard you. After I returned, things never felt the same. I'd walk down familiar streets and feel watched, not by people, by the spaces between them, the corners of rooms, the silence between sentences. The feeling grew like a mold you can't see until it's everywhere. I started to draw. I don't know why. I was never artistic, but the sketches came unbidden, like something moving my hand while I slept. All was the same. Trees bent in unnatural angles, windows where there shouldn't be windows, stairs beneath roots, and faces, blank, eyeless faces, watching. One night, I received a package with no return address. Inside was an old photograph, faded and brittle. It showed the street I had seen in Grayson Hollow, only the buildings were whole, vibrant, alive. Dozens of people stood along the porch of the church, smiling, except the faces had been scratched out, every one of them, and on the back, written in looping, spidery hand, "You were there." I don't remember being in the photo, but I can't shake the feeling that I was. Then the voices began. They didn't whisper. They laughed. Quietly at first, like wind chuckling through leaves. But then clearer, sharper. They laughed like they knew something I didn't. They laughed from the shadows beneath furniture, from behind closet doors cracked just wide enough to slip a hand through. They knew my name. The worst was the mirror. I saw something move in the reflection behind me. A figure standing just at the edge of the room. All was just out of focus. I'd turn and find nothing, but the mirror showed more than what should be. It showed what waited, what followed. I smashed it. But in every pane of glass, I saw Grayson Hollow. I saw it waiting. I tried leaving the state, driving for days until the landscape changed. But the drawings came with me, carved into bathroom stalls, burned into toast, scrawled in fog on car windows. Once I stayed in a roadside motel in Nebraska and woke up to find a pine branch laid across my chest. You don't escape it. You bring it with you. A few weeks ago, someone posted online about a missing hiker near McDowell County, last seen heading toward an unmarked trail. The photo they shared of his last known location showed something in the background, half hidden, wooden steps, moss-covered, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my marrow, that I'd see him soon. They always come back, one way or another. The hollow waits, not for everyone, just the ones who listen too closely, who see what should be forgotten. I keep the candle from the old woman's house. It never goes out, because if it does, the knocking starts again, and this time, I don't think I'll be able to pretend I don't hear it. They say there's a stretch of the Appalachian Mountains where the trees grow too close, too tall, and the mist never lifts. Locals call it Black Hollow, but you won't find it on any map. That's part of the lore. Some believe it was intentionally removed, blotted out like a mistake. Others say it was never marked to begin with, like the land itself refused to be claimed. I first heard of Black Hollow in the diary of a missing hiker, discovered years after he vanished. The last entry was brief. If you see the wooden totems, turn back. They watch. They remember. There were no totems when I arrived, just miles of forest thick as fog and silence that pressed against your skull like altitude. I had come alone, driven by curiosity, research, and a desire to disappear from my own life for a while. Black Hollow felt like the perfect place, a boundary between the known and the unspeakable. The first day passed without incident. The woods were quiet, save for the occasional snapping twig or fluttering bird. But the deeper I moved, the stranger things became. The light changed, colors dulled. My watch ticked slower. By the second day, I found carvings in the bark of the trees, eyes always watching, some open, some closed. The dream started on the third night. I saw people, barefoot, wide-eyed, silent, moving between trees like shadows. In the dream, I followed them, but no matter how fast I walked, they remained ahead. All was just out of reach. When I woke, my feet were muddy. By the fifth day, I had lost the trail. My compass spun. My phone died. I started leaving marks on trees, but each morning the marks were gone, or moved, or mirrored. Time bent in ways I could not explain. I heard voices in the wind. My name, whispered gently, almost lovingly. A song hummed in an old tongue. I began to see the totems. At first they were simple, bundles of sticks lashed with vines, hanging from the trees like ornaments. Then they became more elaborate. Human shapes with moss for hair, doll-like effigies, with faces carved into stone. I tried not to look too long. Something about them made the air thicker, heavier. My chest hurt around them. I bled from the nose twice. On the seventh day I found the chapel. It was sunken into the earth, more burrow than building, made from rotting logs and patched with animal hides. Inside, rows of pews faced a pulpit made from bones. Behind it, a massive wooden idol with a blank face and arms stretched open. I do not know how long I stood there. I left when the walls began to breathe. From then on, the forest changed. Trees bent toward me, leaning like curious children. My food spoiled overnight. My water turned black. I drank it anyway. I no longer slept. I walked. I listened. Eventually, I stopped feeling lost. Instead, I felt found, seen, wanted. The forest whispered to me now. Not in words, but in feelings. Hunger, despair, longing, love even. Twisted, ancient love that did not recognize kindness, only permanence. I remembered stories of people who wandered into the mountains and were never seen again. Maybe they hadn't died. Maybe they stayed. Maybe they were watching me now, from just behind the veil of leaves. On the 10th day, I reached the heart. It was a clearing, perfectly circular, with no undergrowth. Only a single stone slab in the center, covered in symbols that pulsed when I looked at them. Above, the sky spun, stars in patterns I had never seen. Time slowed, the air buzzed. I stepped onto the stone. I remember a sound like thunder beneath the earth, and then silence. When I woke again, I was back at my car, parked where the trail had ended days before. No mud, no moss. My backpack neatly packed beside me. My recorder was full. Every night, every whisper, every footstep logged. But the last file was different. It was my voice, chanting in a language I didn't know. Now I dream of the hollow every night, and in those dreams, I am not alone. The watchers are with me. They do not speak, but I understand them. They are patient. They are old. They are waiting. Sometimes I wake in the forest. Sometimes I do not wake at all. They called it Marrowbone Ridge, a stretch of Appalachian wilderness so old and untouched that even the trees seemed to grow with suspicion. The nearest town, Black Veil, was 20 miles away and shrinking every year. No cell signal reached the ridge. No official trails marked the way. It was one of those places that the old folks warned you about with the same quiet certainty they'd use when predicting rain. It started with a newspaper clipping I found tucked inside a used book at a secondhand store. The clipping had yellowed. With age, the ink smudged but legible. 3 hikers vanished near Marrowbone Ridge. Search abandoned after 10 days. Locals refused to assist. There was no date, no author, just that one small paragraph. I asked the store owner about it, but he said the book had come from an estate sale upstate. No name, no history, just a box of forgotten stories. The name stayed with me. Marrowbone Ridge. It sounded too strange to be real, like something out of folklore. But it was real. I found it on an old map in a university archive, marked faintly in red ink and circled twice. I began to dig. There were whispers online, buried in message boards and unlisted blogs, stories about people who had gone missing, strange lights in the forest, and a humming sound that vibrated the bones. One post simply read, "Don't look at the sky, not there. It's wrong." I took a leave of absence from work, said I needed to clear my head, packed light. Just enough food for 5 days, a water filter, notebooks, and a weatherproof camera. I left behind a note for my sister, just in case. I didn't tell her where I was going. The road to Black Veil was crooked and poorly maintained. The town itself looked like it had been built out of forgotten lumber and patched with rust. The general store was also the diner, post office, and sheriff's station. No one smiled. When I asked about Marrowbone Ridge, and they went quiet. Some just turned their backs. One man, old and gnarled like a root, stared at me for a long time before saying, "If you hear your own voice, run." The trailhead wasn't marked. I had coordinates from a blogger who'd claimed to make it halfway before turning back, said he saw a deer that didn't blink, said the shadows moved in the wrong direction. I followed his notes through a clearing, over a dry creek bed and into trees so thick they swallowed sound. That first day, everything felt normal. Birds chirped, branches cracked beneath my boots. I found an abandoned camp long since reclaimed by the forest, a rusted lantern, a torn sleeping bag, and a compass pointing south when it should have pointed north. I kept moving. That night, the forest was too quiet. No wind, no bugs, just a stillness so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I dreamt of a tall figure wrapped in bark, its arms bending the wrong way. It didn't move, just watched. When I woke, my campfire was dead. My tent zipper was open. The second day brought the hum. Faint at first, like a refrigerator's motor, then louder, constant. I couldn't tell where it came from. It didn't change with direction or distance, just filled the air like pressure. Found carvings in the trees, spirals, handprints, something that looked like a deer skull with too many antlers. Some were fresh, too fresh. I started marking my own trail with red tape, but each time I checked behind me, the tape was gone. On the third day, I saw the figure from my dream. It stood between two trees, tall and thin, its skin dark and ridged, like bark, no face, just hollows where eyes should be. It didn't move. I blinked and it was gone. That night I heard my own voice outside the tent. "Let me in. It's cold. It's me. You know it's me." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice circled the tent, always just out of sight. I gripped the knife under my pillow and counted seconds until dawn. Day 4 broke with rain, but the sky wasn't right. It pulsed. The clouds swirled in, hexagonal patterns. I didn't feel wet, even though the rain fell in sheets. I saw animals moving in the trees, raccoons, deer, birds, but none of them made a sound. One bird flew into a tree and stayed there, wings spread wide, unmoving. I stumbled upon a structure that day, half buried in the earth. It looked like a church, but wrong. The windows were triangular. The door was round and carved with symbols I couldn't understand. Inside, I found pews made of bone and ash. The air was warm, smelled like iron. I heard singing, children maybe, soft and slow. I turned and saw nothing. I ran until my legs gave out. I slept beneath an overhang, too afraid. To build a fire, the dreams returned, twisted trees and hollow people crawling on all fours, whispering in tongues too old for language. Day 5, I found the stone circle, perfectly symmetrical. 11 stones, each taller than me, arranged in a ring, the ground. Inside was scorched. At the center, a totem made of sticks and skin. Human skin. I knew then I was not the first, would not be the last. I tried to leave. I retraced every step, every landmark. The carvings were different now. The trees had moved. The creek bed flowed uphill. I walked for hours in one direction and ended up back at the stone circle. That night I heard my sister's voice. "Please come home. It's safe here. We're all here. Just step into the circle." I didn't sleep, just waited for morning. But morning never came. The sun rose, but the light was wrong. Too white, no heat, no shadows. I walked anyway. I walked until my legs bled, until I lost my pack. I walked until the forest opened into a field I had never seen. At the center stood the figure, waiting, arms wide, faceless. Behind it, the sky tore open. I stepped forward, and now I write this, though I do not know where I am. The forest still moves. Time bleeds. I see myself sometimes walking ahead, always ahead. The watchers follow, unseen but near. If you find this, leave. Burn the page. Forget the name Marrowbone Ridge, or it will remember you too.